Hey there, welcome back to Module 1. Today in Lesson 3, we are going to talk about getting rid of I can't statements regarding food. If you've ever found yourself saying that you can't eat something because you don't have self-control when you start, or you have certain foods you avoid, then this lesson is for you. I want you to think back to the last lesson. What were your food labels? Did you come across any forbidden foods? Food labeling inevitably leads to something called forbidden foods. Let's talk a little bit about what forbidden foods are. The forbidden foods are the foods you assign the I can't or I shouldn't to. They are typically foods you avoid for fear of overindulging in them. When you think about the forbidden or the I can't foods, do any of these statements ring true to you? It makes me feel out of control when I eat it, or I am or will get addicted to it if I eat it. I feel guilty after I eat it, or if it's bad for me, I probably shouldn't eat it. So how do we get rid of the forbidden or the I can't food mentality and feel safe around all kinds of food? Step 1 is to identify your forbidden or I can't foods. If you need, I want you to pause this video and take a minute to think about it. Then, I want you to write them down in your notebook. Step 2 is to identify where the food labeling comes from. Is it from a past experience or maybe a fear? Maybe you've learned that a certain food is bad to eat, so you've always just avoided it. Again, I want you to pause the video and write down a few sources of your forbidden foods. Your next step is to list any nervousness or fears that you have surrounding the food. Lay it all out there, and go ahead and write that in your notebook now. Step 4 is to create neutral and positive statements regarding the food. I want to take a look at a couple examples so you understand what I'm talking about. When you look at your forbidden food, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. 1, where does this come from? 2, what are my fears? And 3, you're going to develop a neutral food statement regarding the food. So, for example, let's take a chocolate chip cookie. Your past experience may be that when you eat chocolate chip cookies, you eat too many of them. The fear that you have surrounding the chocolate chip cookie is that you won't be able to stop or feel satisfied with eating just one. So the neutral food statements that you're creating is that cookies do not make me a bad person, just like we talked about how food is inherently neutral. The next statement could be, eating a cookie will not make me fat. And lastly, cookies can be part of a healthy diet. Let's take a look at another example just to help you understand this concept better. Carbohydrates, typically a forbidden food for a lot of people. So you have to ask yourself, where does this fear come from? Maybe from your family or your social circle. It seems like nowadays everyone is on a no-carb diet, and maybe your mom was on one your whole life, so that's the only thing that you've known. The fears surrounding that is that you might gain weight if you eat any of it because that's the experience that you've had in the past. So let's talk a little bit about some neutral food statements that you can create regarding your fear of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are actually a great source of energy. Carbohydrates alone will not make me gain weight, and I can enjoy carbs as a part of a healthy diet. If you don't believe these right now, we are going to talk about how these neutral food statements are true. Okay, here's your action item for this lesson. Following the previous couple slides templates, I want you to write out the 4 steps for your forbidden food. Start by first identifying the food, then identify the source. Write down your fears associated with this food and then create some positive, neutral food statements regarding the item. The next step we will take is learning to say I can to foods without fear. So let's jump right in. Before we begin, I want you to give yourself permission to say I can. It's okay, I will talk about what this means in the coming slides. I just want you to give yourself permission to say I can right now. Step 1 in learning to say I can to foods is to pick one of your forbidden food items that you actually would like to enjoy periodically and without guilt. Can you think of one right now? Step 2 is to sit down and visualize a positive experience with this food. Okay, it might sound a bit new agey or out there, but this really works. I want you to take a moment to visualize yourself in a vulnerable position around that food, and imagine yourself pushing aside the thoughts and urges to binge or get out of control with that food, and see yourself with your mind's eye making a different choice. Step 3 is to act out what you've just visualized. Now is the time to create a positive experience to associate with a food that you've struggled with before. As much as possible, I want you to clear your life of potential triggers, even if it's for the next half hour you're doing this exercise. Put aside the fears, the worries, the past experiences, or the emotions of the day, and just make a positive experience happen. Let's take a look at an example so you can better understand how this works. Let's follow an example for a chocolate chip cookie. If you haven't noticed, that happens to be my favorite treat. In the past, every time you make cookies, you find yourself sick from eating too much dough and too many warm, fresh, out of the oven cookies. You always regret eating as many as you do, and you commit to never doing that again. But what happens? You do, over and over again, and you wonder why you have no self-control. Now I want you to visualize a positive experience with that food. So imagine a rainy day, perfect day for making cookies. Think about the urges that will come to overeat the dough, but instead imagine yourself eating only a little bit. Imagine the freshly baked cookies and think about how you will eat just one and truly enjoy it as you listen to your body's cues of when to stop. I want you to make it an enjoyable experience for yourself. And lastly, act out what you've just visualized. I want you to create a positive association with that food. So put aside the past fears, worries, and other emotions of the day. If possible, I want you to get rid of all potential triggers by making the space and time your own with no distractions. Once you've successfully eaten a small amount of cookie dough and just one warm baked cookie, the next time you're in that situation of baking cookies, you will have real experience to draw from that will remind you that you are capable of making different choices. Now, this can be done with all kinds of scenarios. Sometimes office break rooms are filled with potluck items and it's hard for you to make good choices when it's all there and all available. This is a great time to try this visualization technique. Or maybe you tend to overeat at restaurants. Before you go, I want you to visualize the scenario, and the next time you are eating out, you can try it. Have you ever heard of athletes visualizing how they want their event to play out, and then they perform it exactly the way they visualized it? This is the exact same method, but with food. Visualize the experience that you want to have, and if you do it enough, it will happen. It does take practice, but it will happen if you are diligent about it. Okay, let's talk about making peace with all kinds of food. This is just a further step in the visualization process. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. What do I need to feel safe around this food? What precautions might I take with this particular food? And what guidelines or parameters will I follow? Let's take a look at a few scenarios to help you understand this concept better. Here's an example, an office work party. The food available is a potluck, and you know what potlucks look like. There are all kinds of foods, including lots of carbs, such as pastries, chips, and breads. The first question you need to ask yourself is, what do I need to feel safe around this food? Maybe you need to remind yourself that food is neutral and that it does not define you no matter what you choose to eat. The next question to ask yourself is, what precautions should you take? Maybe you will bring a fruit dish that you enjoy and know is good for your body so that you will eat more of it instead of the other items that are at the potluck. And then lastly, I want you to ask yourself what guidelines you would like to follow. So maybe you will ask yourself your hunger levels before eating and be mindful as you eat to stop before you get overfull. You may also want to pick one particular appealing treat to enjoy and stop there. Let's take a look at another scenario, this time at a restaurant with friends. The restaurant is filled with really good food, appetizers, drinks, main dishes, and lots of desserts to choose from. So your first question is to ask yourself what you need to feel safe around this food. Maybe you need to remind yourself that you are at the restaurant to enjoy the company of your friends and not to obsess over the food. What precautions might you take before you get to the restaurant? Instead of going to the restaurant hungry, maybe you decide you want to eat a little snack midday so that you're not starving when you get there. You know that you tend to overeat when your hunger levels get high. A few guidelines that you could follow while you were at the restaurant is to tell yourself that you will enjoy one drink and then ask for water after that. Or you will remind yourself that eating your veggies always makes you feel better. And so you will find a dish with veggies that you can enjoy with your meal to help you feel full and not overeat. The point that I want to make is that you need to do what you can to make eating food an enjoyable and non-stressful event. Remember what we talked about before. Food is inherently neutral. It does not define you as a person. So here's your action item to further your forbidden food practice. I want you to think of a common scenario that you experience with food, and then I want you to outline the steps to make it an enjoyable experience. Ask yourself the questions of, what do I need to feel safe around this food? What precautions do I need to take ahead of time? And what guidelines will I follow during that moment? I want you to start practicing these techniques in the food scenarios you encounter, and you will soon notice that you will learn to enjoy these situations without feeling guilt, sadness, or a desire to avoid them altogether. You are well on your way to becoming an intuitive eater. Congratulations!